Okay, so what do you remember about the tabernacle so far? Because we're coming down to the finish line today. We were studying the tabernacle. What do you recall about it? You could even look at your cheat sheet if you want to.
Do you have any extra cheat sheets?
We do, right up here. Joseph will probably use one too.
Anybody else?
Well, it had a courtyard. And what was the purpose of that courtyard? Yeah, to wall it off from the unclean, right? And then we had a bronze altar. What do you remember about the bronze altar? This is where the sacrifice actually occurred. The whole burnt offerings occurred. What do you remember about the altar of incense? I want to know specifics. How wide was it? How high? No. Twice a day, incense was offered at the same time that with the lampstand. It had how many lamps on it? Seven. And it was about how wide? About 5 feet wide at the top. So what are we talking? Something like that. It had 7 lamps, and at the same time that the altar of incense was rejuvenated and replenished twice a day, then also the oil in the lamps was also replenished, and that was the only source of light in the entire tabernacle. What about the table of showbread? Did we get to that one? No, we didn't even get to the lampstand yet. How about the bronze basin? What was that used for? That's outside the tabernacle, but still inside the enclosure. Washing. That's for ceremonial washing, and it wasn't necessarily for the ceremonial washing of the animal to be slaughtered. It was for the ceremonial washing of the priest's hands and feet before he went in to do his twice daily duties of replenishing the oil and replenishing the incense. And then the one, as we're going to learn, the showbread also plays into this, but we'll get to that. What was the verdict on the priest if he didn't ceremonially wash himself before he went into function? What did God say was going to happen to him? Dead. You're dead. You're going to die. Right? So God was taking this pretty seriously. And now what I want you to start doing is I want you to start ruminating about what you remember about the inside of the tabernacle and what it should conjure up in your mind and what it looked like with all the different decorations that there were. What did we have on top of the ark? Cherubim. 2 cherubim with their wings facing each other, and the cherubim were the angels that had how many wings? 6. Yeah, and it's interesting that all the depictions show basically 2 major groups of 2, and if you find any that are really detailed and if the artist has paid attention to the scriptures, you'll notice that there are 2 groups of wings, but each has indications or scallops where there's 3 on each side. Okay? So the other thing that you don't notice about the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant is that very rarely do you find one that's been recreated for diorama purposes. That what is it missing? What does a cherubim also have? What is its notoriety? It has 6 wings, but also it's covered in eyes. Yeah. It's what?
Covered in eyes.
Covered in eyes. Yeah, you're going to hear it this morning in the sermon in Revelation. Yeah, it's covered in eyes.
In Isaiah as well, right?
And then, what?
In Isaiah as well, right? Is it Isaiah?
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel.
Yeah, Ezekiel. And there's a slightly different description of the cherubim there, but still they have 6 wings. What was supposed to happen above the Ark of the Covenant, above the atonement seat, but between the 2 cherubim? What did God say was going to happen there? That's where his presence is going to dwell. That's where he's going to be able to communicate with the priest and answer any yes-no questions, which is also, for the Urim and the Thummim. But that's where God's going to communicate with the priest. So, okay, let's pick this up then. We finished with the tabernacle last week, and there's a place on page 2 where you can start drawing your own little diagram of the entire tabernacle complex. But just by way of review, there's your Holy of Holies on the left side, and then this is the Holy holy place right here. And you have the table of showbread over here, and the lampstand was right over here, and the little altar of incense was right in there. So, and there's kind of a picture of it for you. And quite honestly, we don't know if the Ark of the Covenant was placed longitudinally, or oftentimes what you'll see is it's placed this way, with the handrails going this way. That would certainly be a much easier way to get it in. And there's a little, I want you to take mental note of where the bars are on this Ark of the Covenant. Just make a mental note. It's placed about halfway up, right? Okay, just take a note of that. And then we had the 4 layers of material that was used. And that very first layer that you would see from the interior of the tabernacle was that white linen with the colored yarn and cherubim. And cherubim would be a heavenly symbol that's going to remind you of heaven, right? And their gold clasps were used to kind of hold it in place. That second layer on top of that was goat hair, and then they were using bronze clasps for that. This outer one was ram skins dyed red, and that would probably give it a little bit more of a secondary waterproofing. There's its water vapor barrier, if you want to call it that. And then the outer layer was the sea cow hides, and I preempted you last week and said I have no idea where they got sea cow hides. They probably brought them with them from Egypt. So, were there any extra copies for the Casey family up here? Yeah, they're right here. Good. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's your kind of your review of the tabernacle itself. Bases of the tabernacle were made out of silver, and they're gathered from that atonement money that we read about earlier. And in what way do the facts concerning the base of the tabernacle help you appreciate this passage more? You know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. Now this is going to have to cause you to recall last week what that atonement money was. And this atonement money is now going to be used in the temple here, in this gold. Keep this passage in mind for just a second. If you look at the right side, whenever an Israelite looked at the tabernacle, they would see the silver that they had paid to remind them of how God had spared their life in Egypt. Okay? So this atonement payment, it served as the tabernacle's foundation. Some of the silver that was used, it was also used to cap the posts on the perimeter fencing, if you want to call it that, around the side, and also in the temple complex itself. But here's where it kind of ties back into that Peter passage. It reminds us of Jesus, not only the foundation of the church, but also without his atoning blood, we would not be able to stand before God. You pay in this money, this atonement money, for being delivered out of Egypt, and you don't know at this point what is this going to be used for. I'm just doing what God tells me to do through Moses, right? And it goes into this treasury, and now all of a sudden it comes back, and it becomes basically the foundation of this tabernacle, which symbolizes, in essence, in its easiest essence, what?
That God's with the Israelites.
Yeah. Yeah. That God is dwelling with his people in a very tangible form, right? Our layout for our church is not too far removed from the floor plan of the tabernacle or David's temple, or Solomon's temple, is it? Here's where we enter. Don't really have a narthex, so we'll call the narthex out here. This is where God's people assemble, right here. And while we don't refer to it as a Holy of Holies, here's our 3 steps that go up into the chancel area, right? And then depending on how you want to look at it, our chancel area could be this, and this could be the communion railing. And behind the communion railing, here's now the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah? But what symbol do we have in our church that for centuries, the church has looked at it and understood it to depict what? What depicts what?
The altar with the cross.
The altar with the cross depicts the presence of God amongst us. So imagine my dismay when I find out years ago that a pastor, in order to make a visual point of God sitting on his judgment seat, pulls a chair up to the altar, climbs up onto the altar, pulls the chair up, and then sits on that chair on the top of the altar. Am I the only one who thinks that's a little bit inappropriate?
Oh, yeah.
I am the only one who thinks that's inappropriate?
I think it's weird.
That was bad judgment. Really bad judgment. And I'll bet you $1 to a donut that everyone who witnessed that remembered the event, and they don't remember what? The point. All they're going to remember is that this pastor climbed up on the altar, and even if they don't know that the altar symbolizes the presence of God amongst us, I'm sorry, that's just a little bit wackadoo. Brian, you had your hand up?
I was just wondering if you had a congregation of 2,000 or 5,000 people, if that wouldn't be more relevant to climb up on top.
If it wouldn't be more what?
I don't know, maybe I'm using the wrong word. Would it be
Relevant.
would it be mean something more if you were so more people could visualize or see you?
Would it mean more? Yeah, it would be thought of as being weird, not appropriate, and disrespectful by 5,000 people instead of 125.
Everybody in our society believes that about us anyway. What's the difference?
What?
I think we're all weird because we're Christians, right?
So how does that relate to climbing up in a disrespectful way?
Well, because
in my humble
you
estimation?
said people would think we were weird if you did that.
Yeah, he definitely contributed to that understanding, if there were any visitors there that day. This is a strange group of people if they've got their pastor climbing up on an altar in order to make a point in his sermon. That's just no discernment.
Right.
Simply as that in my head, that's just no discernment. If you want antics, go to some other church. In my humble estimation, that's just disrespectful, I would say. But so you can kind of see the correlation between the layout, the footprint of the tabernacle, the footprint of the temple, and then the footprint of our church, right? So, can you recall what the symbol that's etched on the front of our marble altar looks like?
I love that.
Yeah, do you remember what it stands for? So it has a circle, and it has IC with a line over the top, and the line over the top is a Roman symbol for saying this is an abbreviation. Okay? Yeah, Jesus Christus
Victorious.
Nika. Jesus Christ is victorious, or Jesus Christ, you could even translate it, prevails, or conquers. Nika is, well, do you know the tennis shoe line called Nike? That's taken from the Greek word Nika. It means power, in its essence, yeah? So you're running on powerful shoes. They give you power. Okay. I added this last week. Just to kind of give you some sort of scale proportion. So there's the tabernacle. And then you've got Solomon's temple kind of superimposed upon it. And then, this is from my Solomon's temple Bible study. I just pulled it out. But then look at the size of the palace. Some have pointed out that maybe that's just a tad disproportionate in relationship. Did he really need all that space compared to all the space for the temple itself?
The palace is Herod's palace?
That is King David or Solomon's palace. Yeah, yeah. And the setup, I guess I could have thrown. It wasn't really related. I could have thrown a setup of the floor plan. But if you can think of east this way, if we turn this whole thing, the temple, or the tabernacle, the temple itself was up over here, and then there were some gardens, and then the palace itself was basically on the same compound, or the same mound, or high point of the city of Jerusalem. But it gives you some idea of how massive that temple was compared to the tabernacle. So, anyway.
It wasn't a part of that temple, when you asked about the temple, the outer courts were huge to it all.
Yeah.
Gathered, right?
Yeah. Yeah, now I gotta go through the build again, but, and I almost threw in a video of the temple, but we're kinda talking about the tabernacle, and I didn't know how my time was gonna go for these last. But yeah, look at the outer courts. And then around this itself, this is just the temple complex itself. Around this, you had a massive other outer courts. This would have been all open right here, about proportionally. It was about this width, again, this far of open space. And then underneath it, you had covered areas where people could also gather in inclement weather. And you would enter from gates. 3 of the 4 gates, you kind of entered underneath, and then you came up and then to the ground level, okay? But you had about the same width of the temple on this side, and about half of that on the north and south side. But then essentially you had what I'm going to call a portico. It's covered, just a colonnade all the way around that as well. It was just absolutely gigantic. Or as Aaron used to say when he was 12, it was ginormous, which is gigantic and enormous combined. So, yeah, good point, Murray, thanks. All right, this is Solomon's temple, and I'm just making note. Remember we had 1 lampstand and 1 table of showbread in the tabernacle. When the temple gets built, God really upgrades things. Because the table of showbread in the tabernacle is going to have 12 loaves of bread, replaced once a week, every Sabbath. When we get to the temple, you've actually got a lampstand with 7 lamps and a table of showbread for every single one of the 12 tribes. So, but there's also the space for it now too. You saw the increase of the upgrade in square footage. So, anyway, I just thought I should have just drawn that from scratch. That was a pretty bad graphic. So, okay, so the gold altar, we're going to take a look at that now. So here's the altar of incense. And this thing was essentially built like the offering barbecue pit outside. It wasn't really, a bowl wasn't really used. It was kind of a grating to catch ash. And there was kind of a solid section that the incense would be burned there. But of course, again, it had 4 horns. So anyway, it was made out of acacia wood, which you recall is impervious to bugs. Bugs just can't live in acacia wood. And it's overlaid with gold. Here they painted it. And it's about 1.5 feet square, and it's about 3 feet high. So just about, well, desk height is what, 29 inches, something like that. So it's 36 inches, about like that, somewhere like that. Gold rings, molding around the top. Incense offered twice a day at the same time that the lamps were cleansed and filled with oil. So, and then you see the ephod. They've got 1 gem for each of the 12 tribes, and then tucked inside in a little pocket behind was what? Do you remember? That the weird names, Urim and Thummim, which were devices that we don't know even what they looked like. They're not described to us, but they were used as ways to communicate with God and ask him yes or no questions, and he could answer. So, okay, so we go from the gold altar now to the lampstand. And there they've done a pretty nice reproduction, I would say. 7 lamps of pure gold, resembles an almond tree, which was the first to blossom in the spring. And then it's the only light source in the tabernacle, and it's from Josephus that we get, the Jewish historian, that we get the dimensions, that it's 5 feet high and then it's 2 feet on either side. I mixed up my dimensions before. It's not 5 feet wide, it's 4 feet wide, but 5 feet tall. So I'm 6'3", 6'4", so it's gonna be maybe about my chin in height. So, for us, it would obviously remind us that Christ is the light of the world. But for Israel, they were the light for the Gentiles. Yeah, they were supposed to be God's church. Point them to the one true God. So, if we keep going, now we're going to get to the table of showbread that you can add to your diagram. And again, it's made of acacia wood. It's overlaid with gold. It's about 3 feet long. It's about 1.5 feet wide. It's about 2.25 feet high. And again, sometimes people will ask me, that seems to be a weird dimension, 2.25 feet high. But remember, these are all converted from cubits. So they were round numbers in cubits. So the 12 loaves reminded the priests that they were serving on behalf of the 12 tribes of Israel. And those are then replaced every single Sabbath, right? But it's also very much this reminder, like they had on the blood on the thumb and on the big toe, right? This service that I'm always in service, and on the ear. So I'm always in service to God's word, the atonement blood on my ear. I'm always in service to God's word. But then I'm also going to use my hands and my feet in service to God's people with that word, right? And then here again you have this reminder to the priests of the 12 loaves of showbread, that you're in service to the 12 tribes of Israel. I think good symbolism, because what usually happens when a man gets promoted and elevated to a position of responsibility, is there not a chance that it would go to his head? Just asking. Yeah. I think that's one of the things, just as an aside, that's one of the things that when you're in our training system, Pastor Thompson can speak up to this, or he can go, I disagree with you, and we could disagree on this one. I think our training system, when you're in it, you're going, oh my gosh, why does this have to be so blinking rigorous? I'm just studying to be a pastor, for heaven's sakes. Then you quickly learn that it doesn't get any easier. You graduate your senior year from Martin Luther College, and everyone tells you, well, when you get to the seminary, it's going to be easier. It's not going to be any as rigorous as what you've been experiencing. And you start complaining and whining to the upperclassmen, this isn't any easier. Well, by the time you get to your senior year, it really lays off. It really becomes a lot easier your senior year. Hogwash. But there's a method to their madness in that. There's a method to their madness in the fact that you study really, really hard with a subject that is really very difficult for you, and you end up walking away with a grade of a C+, or a C, or a C-. It teaches you persistence. It teaches you humility. And it teaches you that you're entering into this for a life of service. See, the truth of the matter is that no one at the seminary on the faculty will ever say this to you, but the truth of the matter is about the ministry, it's not about you. It's about Jesus. If that's true about the public ministry, what does that say about the priesthood of all believers? I mean, understand me properly when I say that to you. When David Bickle has a problem with Christian when he turns 16 and he comes to me, I'm not going to say, David, this is not all about you. This is all about Jesus. We don't have time for this chit-chat. That's not what I'm saying. You understand what I'm saying. So just stew on that. What does that say? If that holds true, it's not about you for the public ministry. What does that say about the priests who are in the priesthood of all believers? It's a life of service. That's the #1 teaching of the office of the doctrine of vocation. My life is now a life of service screenshot of this diorama that they put together for you. And I'll get out of Jeremy and Corey's way so they can actually digest some of this since I'm not transparent anymore. Okay, then we're gonna add one more thing, the Holy of Holies, the Ark. We're starting to roll this thing down here to the finish line. So there's one representation of the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant. That's a rather creative, action-filled visualization of cherubim, right? From this angle, it's kind of hard to tell. You might be able to get a wing here, and maybe another one or two wings in there, but that's a really stylized version.
Or two across. So was it not with the cherubim? Thinking later on, two covered the eyes, two covered the feet, and two.
Yeah, so here we have two down here. And we have nothing covering the face, but these are up here. Now, maybe that is up, maybe those are covering.
Where's the
It's hard to tell with this picture. But this was the one that I found. It's a bad photo, but this is the one that I felt was, yeah, this was the one that I felt probably represented what a cherubim really looks like in real life, right? So, but this is where once a year on the Day of Atonement, the priest went through this elaborate ceremonial washing, made elaborate offerings for himself and then for the people. And this is where he came in, and he would actually drop the bloods on the atonement cover of the Ark of the Covenant, where he'd make atonement for the sins of the people. This is kind of the place, excuse me, where God would show up and in his cloud. And then this too, with the Ark of the Covenant, was made of acacia wood, and it's got overlaid with gold, and you've got the dimensions there to give you some idea. Almost 4 feet long, almost 3 foot wide. So, well, a little over 2 feet. So not huge by any stretch of the imagination. This one too, you can see where the bar was made of acacia wood and it was overlaid with gold. The little rings were also made of gold, and they've got this one just about center or almost higher than on this representation. Now, there is your cherubim. Okay, now obviously they're not covering their faces, but 6 wings, all covered in eyes. Where are the eyes? And then you have each one of the 4 living creatures, as we're going to hear in the Revelation lesson for this morning. One had the head of a man, one had the head of an ox, one had the head of a lion. And then the Revelation text actually specifically says, not just the head of an eagle, but the head of a flying eagle. I'm not exactly sure what that means, other than activity and action and in motion. But that was specifically mentioned. So, once you get to the inside of the Ark of the Covenant, what you have is Aaron's staff. You have the table of testimony, which is essentially the 2 tablets, second go-around of the 10 Commandments, which was a summary of what? What? The summary of the covenant that God has with his people. And then in this case, it looks like they got themselves a bowl of chickpeas to represent the manna. All right, so
Coriander seed.
yeah, or coriander seeds, but some will say that that's really what the manna was. But we went through that. There's just not enough coriander in the area that they were traveling to be able to feed anybody for the length of time that they were needing to be fed. Here you go. Cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet, with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the chest to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They are not to be removed. So actually, all of these representations are not making detailed countenance of God's word when they make these reproductions. These poles are supposed to be down near the feet. Okay? So there's another representation of the cherubim. So So that finishes our little tour of the tabernacle itself. Before we get into a little bit of review and a little bit of looking at sacred silhouettes, any questions that anybody has that I can't answer?
Yes, actually.
Constantine.
Why the loaves were not 12 but 11 on the pictures?
Yeah, don't ask me. I caught that too. Yeah. Supposed to be 12. Yeah. One for each tribe. What?
Someone was hungry during service.
Probably during the photo shoot, someone grabbed one and had lunch.
The priest
Yeah.
ate the meat.
Yeah. And in this weather, I mean, in a case like that, the bread could be used after it was slopped out by the priest, but I don't know. I mean, if you leave bread out for a week in this type of environment, is it gonna mold or is it gonna be edible? It'll just be dried out, right? Hard, dip it in some wine and you're good. Or some olive oil and you're good. A little balsamic vinegar, a little pesto, and you're all set. So, all right, we're going to look at a couple sacred silhouettes here. It's on your last sheet of your, it's on page 5 of your handout. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5. They served, now the they are the priests. The writer to the Hebrews is trying to point out. They serve in a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. And then we have in Hebrews 9, for Christ, or you could say but Christ, did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands. That was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself. So what great thing did the tabernacle point to, number one? And how do you see this fact in the tabernacle? What great thing did that tabernacle ultimately point to? All of its ornamentation.
Heaven.
Yeah, it's pointing you to heaven. When you walked in there as the priest, you were going to immediately be stunned by the fact that there's the finest materials. You have all of the symbolism of life, the almond tree and the lampstand, first to blossom in the spring, the cherubim woven into the inner white linen that covers the tabernacle itself. And you're going to be reminded of heaven. Yeah? And I think it would be cool, you know, the priests go home after the first day of service, or even after years of this wandering with the tabernacle, and they actually relate, because they're the only ones allowed in there, they actually relate to their family what it is that they see and what it's like. Cool. How do you see this fact in the tabernacle? I just gave it to you, sorry. I'm always doing that, stealing your thunder. So, let's take a look at the next one. This one's taking us to John and to Matthew. In John 1, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That's literally what the Greek says. And then in Matthew 1, 23, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. In Hebrew, it's Emmanuel. El is God, which means God with us. So the question I've got for you there, in what way or ways was Jesus a fulfillment of what the tabernacle was pointing to do? Pretty simple question. Pretty profound to actually think about it.
In the Old Testament, God's presence was contained within the tabernacle or the temple only, but we now have it real amongst us instead. It's really in one location.
Yeah, what you had in the tabernacle was God's presence dwelling among his people, and they would all be able to see. Remember, they would know that it was time to leave when they saw the cloud rise up above the tabernacle and move away. Okay, time to pack up camp, right? And he would lead them to the next place to go. But it was also limited in the number of people that actually could go and serve and have access to that immediate revelation that God had placed above the Ark of the Covenant, right? Now Jesus comes, which is the theme of the Old Testament, right? He's coming, he's coming, he's coming. A redemption is going to be accomplished. It's going to be accomplished, or it is promised, and it's coming. But then you get to this New Testament era, and he's come. The Messiah has arrived. Yeah? And redemption has not only been promised, now it's been accomplished, it's been fulfilled. Yeah? And now through Christ, you don't need a mediator anymore to go directly to God. So what does that say? And I'm not throwing stones. There's good pastoral reasons for the practice of the Roman Catholic Church. But what does that say about their practice of having to go through the priest to mediate between you and God? Private confession.
It's unnecessary.
It's not really necessary. Now, if you want to go to your priest and confess your sin, or you want to go to your pastor in his office and confess your sin, that's a good thing to do, right? And we'll absolve you, right? And sometimes you just want to go to your priest or you want to go to your pastor to just kind of get a load off and give me some spiritual bearing. Realign my gyroscope for me here. I'm just a little messed up on something. Or I'm just so distraught, or I don't know what to do in life, you know, or what decision to make here. That's different though. There really is still in the Roman Catholic Church this very much Old Testament mediary between God and man practice that goes on. And I mean, you talk to priests, not all of them buy into it, but it is still pretty much the standard operating procedure and practical doctrine, working doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church. As a priest in the kingdom, you don't even need me. You don't need Pastor Thompson to approach the throne of grace with your prayers. Do you? No. No, because you're already a priest in the kingdom. Yeah. So.
Pastor,
Yes, sir.
but wasn't that the way it was with the Israelites? They needed the priest to act as intermediaries for them?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, they needed the priest to be able to go between God and the people. They got that because they were afraid. And it all started at Sinai. The thunder, the fire. We're afraid. Don't make us talk to this guy. You be the intermediary. And God made him then the intermediary. Lee.
Could it be that with the Roman Catholic Church, a person could not approach God directly because really all of his sins are not atoned for? That he is, with his life of works, trying to work out his salvation.
Yeah.
So therefore, it would make sense that if not all your sins were atoned for, how could you approach God without being?
That's a good thought, and I don't know if that's an element in my study of the priest. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time looking into their reasons for the role of the priest and why they maintain it the way they do. The only thing that I have found for sure is that because the priest when he enters the priesthood, he receives that special imprimatur from the bishop to give him the special gift of the Holy Spirit that will actually then he'll be able to work the transubstantiation of the Mass. And it authorizes him also to serve at the Mass. Yeah? So that the bread gets transubstantiated into the body, even though the forma, it still looks like his bread. But the essence or material is actually Christ's body. And the same with the wine.
Well,
So,
isn't the priesthood required because there's a continuous sacrifice? They don't take this sacrifice once for all, so therefore no more sacrifice is required. But Christ gets re-sacrificed at every Mass.
yeah.
And so you pretty much stuck with that role because someone now has to preside over the sacrifice.
Yeah, and the other part of it, other than the fact that they're given this special ability to be able to transubstantiate the liturgy of the sacrament of the altar, right? This continuing sacrifice. Remember too that they also tie to the priesthood this apostolic succession from the first apostles straight down to every single priest that's ever been ordained into the Roman Catholic Church. And once you're given that special apostolic succession, even if you're a pedophile, you never lose the title of being reverend. Yeah? Because that's been something that's been divinely bestowed upon you, right? You prove to be yourself a pedophile in our church body, and short of getting your kneecaps, getting cut off at the kneecaps, there is no serving in the public ministry anymore, under any circumstances. You're out. You're forgiven, right? But you're out. So take it very seriously. But no, I haven't spent an awful lot of time if they've built up all sorts of mechanism and vocabulary to substantiate the way they operate as a priest. So have to go through him. Yeah, I think we covered that. God King we go for a moment. Well, we're kind of rolling into the final. I don't want to share that with you yet. I'm not going to share that yet. Okay. Let's take a look at the end. It's on the bottom of page 5. Exodus 40, 34 to 38. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So considering everything you know about the book of Exodus, what is significant about the way the book closes? So Moses is just about ready to go in, and he can't. Because the glory of the Lord settles upon the cloud, settles upon the tabernacle. And then the book ends. Boom. Is there any significance to that?
Well, doesn't it? It still says, I am with you.
Yeah.
Even though it ends, because he's there. I'm going to be with you when you go.
Does it not foreshadow Moses not being able to enter the promised land?
Well, it certainly might. Some have seen that. The other thing is, Moses has been the intermediary, right, between God and the people. He's the one who's gotten the plans. He's the one who's gotten the worship life of what the priests are supposed to do and when they can do it and when they can go in. Moses has been a man after God's own heart, right? They've spoken. God really endorses him, and he's God's man amongst the Israelites, right? But why in all the world did Moses have it in his idea that he was just going to be able to waltz right into the temple? He's not a priest. I mean the temple, the tabernacle. He's not a priest. Is he? No, he's not. So did he think that he was going to have executive dispensation, divine papal dispensation? He's going to be the only layman who's allowed to go in? I don't know. I guess I would think, you're going to let me in, God. We can have this chat now that we've got this thing set up for the first time. Yeah? But what ultimately does this also say about God, the way this book ends here? The tabernacle has been built. The finest materials have been given by God's people. They've used the finest craftsmen to produce it, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, like Jim said before, the tabernacle designates what? God is dwelling with his people. God has been faithful to a very rebellious, stiff-necked people, and in spite of that, there he is among them, right? Now the video, the recap video that you're going to see here in a few minutes, is going to make very dramatic case for, what? Moses can't go in? And I think what they miss a lot, is actually God's keeping his promise, his covenant promise to his people. Okay? So let me show you the video, and then I'm going to hit you up with the last two questions, and then we'll probably be done just a little bit early. God's faithful to his covenant. He's with his people. Think about what comfort does this give you in your life, and in what ways do you relate with the Israelites throughout the book? We can wrap up our study that way. Here you go.
Along with these instructions about building a sacred tent. what links these two apps together is this crucial story. The people of Israel, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They find themselves at the foot of this mountain called Sinai. Here, God's
Hold on a second, let me start this again. Just to wake us up. Yeah, I did that on purpose.
I think we were having the same problems with the audio on Tuesday nights.
Were you?
Yeah. You could hear music, but you couldn't hear the people talking.
I don't know if we've changed the input. Oh. I wonder if it helps to close my volume. Try the line here.
tells the story of ancient Israel being rescued from slavery. When people say the Exodus story, those are the chapters they're referring to.
But the book has a second half where Moses gives the Ten Commandments to Israel along with these instructions about building a sacred tent.
And what links these two apps together is this crucial story. The people of Israel, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They find themselves at the foot of this mountain called Sinai. And here, God's presence comes dramatically down in the form of a violent storm cloud.
Now let's stop a second and talk about this concept of God's presence, because it's really important for the rest of the book. At the beginning of the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, humanity was in God's presence. They had this close relationship with him, and it was good. But humanity rebels, and the relationship is fractured, and access to God's presence is lost. But God promised Abraham that he would restore his blessing to all of the nations, and that includes this restoration of relationship and access to God's presence.
So here at Sinai, God's presence is now right here in front of them, and it's actually quite frightening. And he's here to invite Israel into this unique and close relationship with him.
And the word used to describe this relationship is covenant. It's like a legal agreement between God and Israel. And it's unique because up till now, God hasn't asked Israel to do anything in return, just to trust him. But here on this mountain, God is going to ask Israel to do something. A lot of things, actually. He gives them a whole set of laws. That it includes the Ten Commandments. And if they obey these commandments, they will become the people who will represent God to the nations of the world.
Like a priest would.
Yeah, in fact, that's what God calls them to become, a kingdom of priests. And this is all connected back to the promise to Abraham that his family would become a blessing to the nations.
Okay, but obeying these laws is going to be difficult because there's a lot of them, and they set a really high standard.
Though if you think about it, I mean, of anybody in the world who should be able to do it, I mean, it's these people who experienced firsthand God's grace and his power when he rescued them from slavery.
And they agree to obey the terms, but then they refuse to go into God's presence because it's still a bit frightening.
And since the people won't go up, Moses goes up to the mountain by himself to meet with God. But God still wants to be with all of his people. And so he says, okay, if the people won't come up here to me, I'll come down off this mountain to be with you all. And that's why he orders Moses to build this elaborate tent as a place where God's presence can be among his people.
And that's why the next thing we get is 7 chapters of extremely detailed architectural blueprints for this tent. It's really, really, really long.
But every detail is important and has some kind of symbolic value. For example, there's all this Garden of Eden imagery inside the tent. And it's to remind you that when you're in the tent, you are in God's presence.
Then we get another 6 chapters describing how they built the tent, which is really just repeating the same blueprints word for word.
Now let's back up, because before the tent is finished, there's this super important story. Moses is coming off the mountain with the 10 Commandments and the blueprints in his hands, and he finds Israel breaking the first 2 commands of the covenant.
Don't have any other gods before me, and don't worship idol statues.
Right, and so here we are, immediately after agreeing to the covenant, they're throwing this ritual party, they're worshiping an idol. And so God says to Moses, you know what, this is not going to work. I should just wipe these people out and start over with you.
But Moses reminds God of his promise to Abraham and pleads with God to spare them, which is a really weird conversation. Why would God need to be reminded of something?
Yeah, it does seem odd, but this dialogue is inviting us into God's experience of grief and pain due to Israel's actions. And he really could walk away. But instead, this God chooses faithfulness to his own promises even though he knows it's going to cost him.
So So we come to the end of the book. The tabernacle's built, God's presence comes down off the mountain to fill it, and in the final scene, Moses goes to enter the tabernacle to be in God's presence.
But he can't. He's actually not able to go inside, and that's how the book ends.
Why can't he go in? That was the whole point.
So when Israel worshipped the golden calf, it was like a slap in the face to God's faithfulness. And so Moses can't just waltz into the tent like everything's just fine. There's a deeper problem still in this relationship.
Will they ever be able to fix the relationship and go into God's presence?
Well, that's what the next book, Leviticus, is all about.
Hey, this is John.
And this is Tim.
We believe the Bible is one long story.
There we go. There's a certain grain of truth. I mean, with these Bible Project videos, sometimes I have to qualify them. I think they made a little bit too big of a deal of the fact that Moses can't go in because there's still a broach in the relationship. I would expect a good Reformed theologian to look at it that way, right? There's no indication in the immediate context that there's still a broach in the relationship. God had said at one point that he was not going to be coming with them. He would send his angel, but he's not, he himself, in the person of the Father that he's been having the relationship with Moses with, was not going to go. But now that covenant has been restored. I mean, I pointed that out to you numerous times over the last 3 lessons, right? That covenant relationship has been restored. The fact that Moses cannot go in, I do not believe, from the context of the scriptures, and even if you dip into the first part of the book of Leviticus, which picks up now from this point in Exodus, that that's the cause. And what they're really missing is the underlying promise that God has kept his covenant relationship with his people. And that's particularly true as New Testament Christians. We see that in Christ. He kept his promise to a stiff-necked and hard-hearted people, right? When the time had fully come, God sent his son. Right? So, thoughts? Comfort does this give you in your life that God still abides with you? What ways do you relate with the Israelites throughout the book? Anybody want to make any comments? Offer any observations before we end our long journey in Exodus?
Even though they sin so much and that God, same as us, as long as we don't turn our back completely on it, he has kept his promise to bring us to heaven.
Yeah.
It's us who break the covenant, not him.
It's always that way, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and yet, like the beautiful, beautiful parable of the prodigal son, right? The father still goes out looking every single day, hoping the son will return. And when the son does return, repentant, tear-filled, lump in his throat, realizing how he has sinned against his father and against heaven, his father just cuts him off. You're forgiven. But, not with those words, with that action. Prepare the fattened calf, go get the ring and put it on my son's hand to indicate that he's part of the family that owns this place. Let's throw a party and be festive because I thought he was dead and now he has returned and my son is alive. Yeah, that's what goes through the heart of God every time a sinner repents and returns to the Lord. What other observations do you have in the last few minutes here?
So I thought it was interesting that you had the 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes and the tribes represented on the ephod, but that the 12 tribes are only together 2 generations, and then the 10 tribes rebel. But I would guess after that, the priests continued to represent all the tribes, right?
Yeah, they did. They didn't alter any of those worship materials. Yeah. And plus, even on the brooch up here that held the ephod, David, there were 6 tribes on one side, on I think onyx, and then the other 6 tribes on another piece of onyx. So three places they're represented. That service, that life of service. Okay, well, if that's it, then we're done with Exodus. And Pastor Thompson's going to be with you next week to start a new topic. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure it'll be spectacular, splendid, and keep you at the edge of your seat. Thank you all for your participation. We'll see you upstairs for worship.